We have with us Professor Juli Peretó from the Universidad de Valencia, and he is also Vice Director of the Institute for Integrative Systems Biology. He has been working for a long time on the origin of life, on the primitive, the most basic biochemical reactions that gave rise to life, and he's here today to answer some of our questions. Juli, can physics and chemistry explain life, and what has life added to the physical world?
Well, it is evident that physics and chemistry are necessary for explanations regarding all biological processes, but are not sufficient, in the sense that if you look backwards to the very primitive systems on Earth, on early Earth, physics and chemistry would suffice to explain the diversity and the different molecules that were present in our planet, making this kind of prebiotic soup. And from different origins, from cosmochemistry, from comets and asteroids, volcanic chemistry, atmospheric chemistry, chemistry associated with the ocean. So at this moment we have good schemes for the origin of those molecules from different sources, different energy sources like UV light or heat or electricity, organic chemistry in water in general, catalysis by minerals, for example. But then if you go through different levels of complexity, like the emergence of replicative polymers, for example, some kind of RNA molecules, ribonucleic acid molecules able to self-replicate with variation, with mutation. So natural selection would emerge. And in addition to chemistry and physics, we must use terms like, or concepts like adaptation to understand the behavior of those systems and the response of those systems to the environment. So in summary, physics and chemistry are, the laws of physics and chemistry are necessary for explaining life, but are not sufficient.
Do we understand the natural emergence of life on Earth? Is it reproducible?
Well, as an historical science, biology never will know with the complete details how life emerged on Earth. The scientific research on life origins must consist in formulating hypotheses that are plausible and testable in the laboratory. That means that everything we can speculate or propose about the origins of life must have a empirical plausibility, or at least we have to use computational models to test the plausibility of those hypotheses. So everything must be compatible with all we know about geology, astronomy, chemistry, or biology. But in addition to that, we have to give support to our hypothesis with empirical tests. In that case, if this is the case, we also could try to reproduce, at least in a small scale, processes and systems that could be a model for those primitive stages. For example, we could, in fact, we have the experiments of vesicles of a simple character based on fatty acids in water. And those vesicles have a behavior very interesting in the sense that they are able to grow, to reproduce, and even to compete between different populations of vesicles. And it has been demonstrated also that vesicles with incorporating inside nucleic acids, if you induce the replication of the nucleic acids, immediately this process has been related to the growth capacity and reproduction of the vesicle. So maybe some biological-like processes that we can observe in these pure chemical systems are the fundamentals of properties that we assign to life, but have very deep roots, these physicochemical properties.
Yes, these are problems of all historical sciences. Next will be, what was the ancestral life very different from the present, from what we see today, or can present life help to understand the distant origins?
Well, Charles Darwin was proposing in a very wild way that all lives on Earth had a common ancestor. So today, this conjecture is our best explanation of many commonalities that we observe in living beings. For example, the universality of the genetic code, the recurrent use of many molecules and metabolic processes, many different aspects in biochemical and genetic traits of living things that are universally distributed can be assigned to this ancestrality, very old ancestrality. So we talk about the last common ancestor or the last universal common ancestor, LUCA, or other terms that are related to this very last community of cells that were the beginning of the main lineages of life, like bacteria and archaea. So we can, scientifically, we can try to reconstruct this last common ancestor using the comparative method in biology. That means comparing the different biochemistries that are present in very different lineages, very distant lineages, or the genomes of the organisms in different branches of the tree of life, trying to deduce this common ancestry. Of course, this is very easy to say, but very complicated to do, in the sense that, for example, methods we are still developing the proper methods to do that, to manage big amounts of data. But also genomes are kind of incomplete historical documents, in the sense that there are many contingencies that we must take in account, like horizontal genes transfer or genes that were lost in different lineages. So the idea is just to reconstruct this minimal denominator of all life, but with important methodological difficulties. And it is important to remark that trying to reconstruct by phylogeny these ancestors is very different to study the origins of life. We are talking about two very different things, in the sense that, well, we don't know the time distance between origins of life and this last common ancestor, but we can realize that from the point of view of complexity, they were very different. We are talking about something similar to extant bacteria, with a genetic code, ribosome, many metabolic pathways were well established, but in the origins of life, we're talking about very, very primitive systems. So we cannot go beyond in the phylogenetic reconstruction to the origin of ribosomes or proteins. And of course, in the origins of life, there were not ribosomes nor proteins. So those that sometimes people is extrapolating the phylogeny to the origins of life is not correct.
To which extent is it possible to predict the emergence the emergence of life, or in other words, may life exist in other places in the universe?
Well, I think it's generally accepted that under a very narrow range of conditions, environmental conditions, organic chemistry in water, moderate temperatures, you have a series of transformations and reactions giving rise to the small set of molecules involved in life. So maybe those conditions were not very specific of early Earth, but were present in different places of the universe, in other solar systems. So why not? I mean, if you consider that given a set of molecules and a set of conditions, then the increasing complexity and the appearing of complex systems behaving with reproduction, self-replication, and other properties that we can recognize in very simple biological systems, it could be that life is present in many other places of our universe.
Is it possible to predict the direction of the evolution of life?
Well, in evolutionary biology we have many examples of similar solutions to similar problems. I mean, evolutionary convergence and analogous solutions are present in the evolutionary history, but I'm very skeptical about the prediction of any evolutionary pathway, in the sense that always, for all biological processes, you have a fraction, most of the time a known fraction of historical contingency. So the greater the contingency, the weaker our capacity to predict. So for sure we can predict things that we are completely convinced that will happen. For example, extinction. So we know that every single species that have lived on Earth has disappeared, and of course extinct species will disappear, and in the ultimate extinction, even of those species that are very resistant and very reluctant to any aggression, like bacteria, will be extinct also in 4.5 billion years, when the sun will explode and collapse all the inner planets.
That's the very last thing that will happen on Earth. Thank you very much.